David Martinez stared at the ceiling of his new bedroom, listening to the soft whimpering coming from down the hall. 3 weeks had passed since he'd married Maya, and 3 weeks since he'd become a stepfather to 7-year-old Isabella. What should have been the happiest time of his life had become a puzzle wrapped in heartbreak. Every morning started the same way. Maya would kiss them both goodbye, her nursing scrubs crisp and her smile bright as she headed off for another 12-hour shift at the hospital. "Take care of my girls," she'd whisper to David, though there was only one girl left in the house after she departed. And that's when the tears would begin. The moment Maya's car pulled out of the driveway, Isabella would retreat to her room or find the furthest corner of the house from wherever David happened to be. If he approached her, even with the gentlest voice and most careful movements, her large brown eyes would fill with tears that she'd tried desperately to hide behind her small hands. "Hey, princess," David had said just yesterday morning, crouching down to her level as she sat at the kitchen table, barely touching her cereal. "Want to help me make pancakes for when Mommy gets home?" Isabella's spoon had clattered against the bowl, and she'd shaken her head vigorously, dark curls bouncing. "No, thank you," she'd whispered, the words barely audible before she'd slipped away from the table and disappeared upstairs. Minutes later, he'd heard the familiar sound of muffled crying. David had tried everything he could think of. He'd suggested they watch her favorite cartoon together. She'd politely declined and found reasons to busy herself in another room. He'd offered to read her stories, help with the puzzle Maya had bought her, even take her to the park. Each invitation was met with the same response: a shake of the head, a whispered, "No thank you," and those heartbreaking tears. The worst part was that Isabella seemed fine when Maya was around. She'd laugh at David's jokes during dinner, even ask him questions about his work as a high school history teacher. She'd let him help her with her homework, giggle when he did silly voices reading her bedtime stories. But the moment Maya left for work, it was as if a switch flipped, and Isabella became a different child entirely. "Maybe she just needs more time," Maya had said one evening as they sat on their bed, voices low so Isabella wouldn't hear. "It's a big adjustment, honey. She's never had a father figure before." David had nodded, wanting to believe it was that simple, but something deeper was troubling him. This wasn't just shyness or adjustment anxiety. When Isabella looked at him, during Maya's absence, there was something in her eyes that made his chest tighten, something that looked almost like fear. Today was no different. Maya had left an hour ago, and David could hear Isabella in the living room, probably playing with her dolls. He'd been grading papers in his study, giving her space, but the silence was becoming oppressive. Taking a deep breath, he decided to try again. "Isabella," he called softly as he entered the living room. "I was thinking of making some hot chocolate. Would you like some?" She was sitting on the floor, her back against the couch, carefully arranging a tea party for her stuffed animals. At the sound of his voice, her shoulders tensed, and she didn't look up. "Isabella," he tried again, taking a careful step closer. "Sweetheart, what's wrong? Please talk to me." That's when the tears started again. Silent at first, just tiny, droplets falling onto her pink dress. But as David took another step forward, the crying intensified, and Isabella scrambled to her feet, clutching her favorite teddy bear to her chest. "I'm sorry," she choked out between sobs. I'm sorry. "Sorry for what, princess?" David's heart was breaking. He wanted nothing more than to scoop her up, hold her tight, and promise her that everything would be okay. But every instinct told him that moving too fast would only make things worse. Isabella shook her head frantically, backing toward the stairs. "I don't want you to be mad. I don't want you to go away." "Go away?" David was bewildered. "Isabella, I'm not going anywhere. I love you and your mommy more than anything in the world." But she was already running up the stairs, her feet pounding against the wooden steps. Her bedroom door slammed shut, and David was left standing in the living room, surrounded by abandoned dolls and the echo of her sobs. He sat down heavily on the couch, running his hands through his dark hair. Whatever was causing Isabella's distress went far deeper than simple adjustment issues. Something had taught this beautiful, gentle child to be afraid of him, and he was determined to find out what. An hour later, when the crying had finally stopped, David climbed the stairs quietly. Isabella's door was slightly ajar, and he could see her small form huddled on her bed, fast asleep from exhaustion. As he reached out to close the door fully, something caught his eye, a piece of paper sticking out from under her pillow, covered with crayon drawings. His heart hammering, David knew he'd found the first clue to unlocking the mystery of his stepdaughter's tears. David's hands trembled as he carefully pulled the crumpled paper from beneath Isabella's pillow. She stirred slightly in her sleep, and he froze, waiting until her breathing returned to its steady rhythm before unfolding what appeared to be a child's drawing. The image made his blood run cold. Crayon figures filled the page, a small girl with dark hair cowering in a corner, while a tall man with an angry red face loomed over her. Dark scribbles covered most of the man's body, as if Isabella had tried to erase him from existence. At the bottom, in shaky 7-year-old handwriting, were the words, "Daddy was mean, he left, David will leave too." David sank into the small chair beside Isabella's bed, the drawing clutched in his shaking hands. Suddenly, everything made terrible sense. The fear in her eyes, the desperate apologies, the way she flinched whenever he moved too quickly. Isabella wasn't afraid of him specifically. She was afraid of what she thought he would become. He sat there for nearly an hour, watching his stepdaughter sleep peacefully for perhaps the first time since he'd known her. When Maya's key turned in the front door downstairs, he carefully folded the drawing and went to meet his wife, his heart heavy with the weight of what he'd discovered. "How did it go today?" Maya asked, dropping her purse and kicking off her nursing shoes. The hope in her voice was painful to hear. "Maya, we need to talk." David's serious tone made her freeze halfway through hanging up her jacket. They sat at the kitchen table, the drawing spread between them like evidence of a crime. Maya's face went through a spectrum of emotions, confusion, recognition, and finally, devastating guilt. "I thought she was too young to remember," Maya whispered, her voice breaking. "She was only 3 when he left. I hoped." "Tell me about him," David said gently, reaching across to take her hand. The story came out in pieces, like shards of glass that had been buried too deep for too long. Isabella's biological father, Marcus, had been Maya's college boyfriend. Charming at first, he'd become increasingly volatile after Isabella's birth. He'd never physically hurt either of them, but his anger had been explosive and unpredictable. He'd yell, throw things, slam doors, and then disappear for days at a time. He was always threatening to leave, Maya explained, tears streaming down her cheeks. He'd pack his bags during every argument, tell Isabella he was going away and it was her fault for being too loud, too needy, too much trouble. She used to follow him around the apartment, apologizing for everything, trying to be perfect so he wouldn't go. David felt sick. And then he actually left? On her 4th birthday, Maya's voice was barely audible. She'd been so excited, kept asking when Daddy was coming to her party. He showed up drunk, started a fight about the expense of the celebration, and stormed out. That was the last time she saw him. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of Isabella's trauma settling between them like a physical presence. "She thinks I'm going to do the same thing," David finally said. "She's trying to be perfect, apologizing for existing, waiting for me to get angry and abandon her." Maya nodded miserably. "I should have told you. I should have prepared you. But I was hoping. God, I was so selfish. I just wanted us to be a normal family." "We can be," David said firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. But first, we need to help her understand that not all fathers are like Marcus. That love doesn't come with conditions and threats. The next morning, David woke up before dawn with a plan. He found Isabella in the kitchen trying to quietly make herself breakfast, her small hands struggling with the cereal box. "Good morning, Princess," he said softly, causing her to startle and nearly drop the box. "I'm sorry," she began automatically, but David held up a gentle hand. "Isabella, can you come sit with me for a minute? I want to show you something." She approached cautiously, perching on the edge of the chair beside him like a bird ready to take flight. David pulled out the drawing, smoothing it carefully on the table. Isabella's eyes went wide with fear. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "You're not in trouble," David said quickly. "I'm not angry. I just want to understand." For a long moment, they sat in silence, both staring at the crayon figures. Finally, Isabella spoke in a voice so small he had to lean forward to hear her. "My first daddy was mean. He said it was my fault when he went away. He said I was too loud and too much work." She looked up at David with eyes full of ancient hurt. "Are you going to go away too?" David felt his heart shatter into a million pieces. This tiny girl had been carrying this burden for years, believing that she was somehow responsible for her father's abandonment, that love was something that could be lost through imperfection. "Isabella," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Look at me, sweetheart." She raised her eyes to his, and he saw not just fear there, but a desperate hope that broke him completely. "I am never, ever going to leave you," he said, each word deliberate and strong. "Not when you're loud, not when you make mistakes, not when you're sad or angry or difficult. Never. Do you know why?" Isabella shook her head, tears beginning to fall. "Because you're not too much trouble. You're exactly the right amount of everything. You're smart and kind and funny, and I am so lucky to be your stepdad. And real dads, good dads, they don't leave. They stay and help you learn and grow, and they love you no matter what. Promise?" The word was barely a whisper. David held out his pinky finger, something he'd seen Maya do with Isabella during their lighter moments. "I promise, pinky promise. And do you know what a pinky promise means?" Isabella hooked her tiny finger around his. "It means you can't break it ever." "That's right. And I'm going to prove it to you every single day, okay? Even when I'm old and gray and you're all grown up, I'll still be here. Because that's what dads do. Real dads stay." For the first time since he'd known her, Isabella smiled at him while they were alone. It was small and tentative, but it was real, and it was the most beautiful thing David had ever seen. 6 months after that pivotal morning conversation, David sat in Dr. Elena Rodriguez's waiting room, watching Isabella color quietly beside him. The weekly family therapy sessions had become a cornerstone of their healing journey, and today marked what Dr. Rodriguez had called a milestone session. The progress hadn't been linear. There had been setbacks, days when Isabella would retreat into her old patterns of fear and silence, especially during times of stress or change. But gradually, like spring flowers pushing through winter soil, trust had begun to bloom between them. "She's testing you," Dr. Rodriguez had explained during one of their early sessions. "Every time she acts out or pushes boundaries, she's asking the same question: are you going to leave now? Your job is to show her, consistently and patiently, that the answer is always no." And David had done exactly that. When Isabella spilled, juice all over his freshly graded papers and dissolved into tears, expecting punishment and abandonment, he had simply cleaned it up and asked if she needed help being more careful next time. When she had a nightmare and crawled into their bed at 3 a.m., shaking with residual terror from dreams of being left alone, He had held her close and sung lullabies until dawn. The breakthrough moments had been small, but profound. The first time, Isabella laughed at one of his silly jokes while Maya was at work. The afternoon she fell asleep, curled up next to him on the couch while he read. The day she asked him to help her with homework, without first apologizing for needing assistance. Today felt different, though. There was an energy about Isabella that David hadn't seen before, a lightness that made her seem to practically float as they walked into Dr. Rodriguez's office. "How has everyone been since our last session?" Dr. Rodriguez asked, settling into her chair with a warm smile. "Good," Maya said, squeezing David's hand. "Really good, actually." Isabella was fidgeting with excitement, clearly bursting to share something. Dr. Rodriguez noticed immediately. "Isabella, you look like you have something important to tell us." "I made something for David," Isabella announced, practically bouncing in her seat. She reached into her small backpack and pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper. "It's a new drawing, but this one's different." With ceremonious gravity, she unfolded the paper and held it up for everyone to see. David felt, his breath catch in his throat. The drawing showed 3 figures holding hands in front of a house with a bright yellow sun overhead. A woman with long dark hair, a tall man with David's brown eyes, and a little girl with pigtails and an enormous smile. At the top, in Isabella's increasingly confident handwriting, were the words, "My family. I love my mom and my dad, David." "Dad, David," Isabella said, looking directly at him with clear, unafraid eyes. "That's what I want to call you, if that's okay. Because you're my real dad now, even though you didn't make me in Mommy's tummy." David couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down his face as he reached for Isabella, who launched herself into his arms with complete trust and abandon. "I love you too, Princess," he managed to say, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you so much." Dr. Rodriguez was beaming, and even Maya was crying happy tears as she watched her daughter and husband embrace. "Isabella," Dr. Rodriguez said, gently, "can you tell us what makes Dad David different from your first father?" Isabella considered this seriously, still nestled in David's arms. "My first daddy made promises, but then he broke them. He said mean things and made me feel scared. But Dad David keeps his promises. When he says he's going to do something, he does it, and he makes me feel safe and happy." "That's exactly right," Dr. Rodriguez said. "And how do you feel about yourself now?" "I feel like I'm not too much trouble anymore," Isabella said with the matter-of-fact tone that only children possess. "Dad David says I'm exactly the right amount of everything, and I believe him now." After the session, they went to Isabella's favorite restaurant to celebrate. As they sat in their booth, sharing ice cream and laughing at David's increasingly ridiculous attempts to catch peas with a spoon, David marveled at the transformation in all of them. Isabella was animated and silly, telling elaborate stories about her school friends and asking David about his students. She sat pressed against his side in the booth, completely comfortable with his presence, occasionally reaching over to steal bites of his dessert with the casual entitlement of a beloved child. "Dad David," she said as they were getting ready to leave. "Yes, sweetheart? When I grow up and get married, will you walk me down the aisle like they do in movies?" David felt his heart expand to accommodate this new rush of love and pride. "Isabella, there is nothing in this world that would make me prouder than walking you down the aisle someday." "Good," she said with satisfaction, "because you're stuck with me forever now." That night, as David tucked Isabella into bed, she reached up to give him a hug that lasted longer than usual. "Dad, David?" "What is it, Princess?" "I'm not scared when Mommy goes to work anymore." "No? Why not?" Isabella smiled sleepily. "Because now I know that even when people go away, they come back. Mommy comes back from work, you come back from school, and you both stay because you want to be with me." That's right, David said, smoothing her dark curls away from her face. We stay because we love you, and love means staying. As he turned off her light and headed downstairs to where Maya was waiting, David reflected on the journey they'd all taken together. It hadn't been easy. Healing never is. But they had done something beautiful together. They had taken a broken, little girl's heart and shown her how to trust again, how to love without fear, how to believe in permanence and safety. In the living room, Maya was curled up on the couch with a book, but she looked up as he entered. She called you Dad David today, she said softly. She did. David sat beside her, pulling her close. How do you feel about that? Maya was quiet for a moment, considering. Grateful, she finally said. Grateful that she has a father who deserves that title. Grateful that you taught her what real love looks like. Upstairs, they could hear Isabella talking quietly to her stuffed animals, probably telling them about her day. The sound was music to David's ears. No more tears, no more fear, just the peaceful chatter of a secure, happy child. You know what the best part is? David said, listening to his daughter's voice drift down the stairs. What's that? She was right when she said I'm stuck with her forever, and I couldn't be happier about it. Maya laughed, the sound light and joyful in their quiet home. Outside, night was falling peacefully over their little family, but inside, everything was exactly as it should be, safe, warm, and filled with the kind of love that stays.